Welcome, everybody, to the community conversations right here on Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. Let me tell you something. Love Bay each and every week is giving us the platform to have the conversations we need to be having about topics that impact us locally and globally. So if you're tuning in, welcome back with your host, Miss Jai. I'm going to be doing this show today discussing women in the workplace. Now, let me tell you something. We've been discussing a lot of really life changing conversations. We've had conversations regarding education, employment, but today we want to circle a little bit around a special target market, and that is women in the workplace. So, although it's employment, we're going to be discussing some real topics that are actually impacting. Now, we've seen that things have changed. Women are becoming more powerful and doing their thing, but there's still some underlying struggles that we're facing. And so each week, what do? We show up to have these conversations to impact change. Now, why is this important? As always, because it plays a vital role in our day-to-day lives and as the goals we try to achieve and the legacies that we're trying to set. We need to be having the serious conversations that are helping us to make those changes. Now, as always, I like to have people join our conversation if you want to, and if you're catching us on a live stream, make sure that you're sending comments. If you want to send any kind of questions or you'd like us to address some answers for you, please hit us up at infolovebay@gmail.com. As always, our producers are right there, ready and waiting to take your comments. Okay, and it's always scrolling at the bottom of the screen because we're number one's African Caribbean diaspora online radio. Now, the guest that I have today, she's very keen on this topic, and I can't say that I'm excited. I can't say that I can't wait to get her on, but before we do, let's get her properly introduced. So the first thing that we want to recognize is that she is a social development specialist. She served as the youngest United Nations coordination officer in Latin America and in the Caribbean, and she's committed to improving education and being highly focused on promoting social entrepreneurship through her business 2114 consultancy services that helps nonprofit organizations to level up. Now, we hail her from the most easterly Caribbean island, Barbados. She is a proud Caribbean woman of African descent, and she's also lived in St. Vincent and the USA. She studied in Rome, Italy, and now calls Canada her home. Please welcome to the stage no other than J. Nadia Headley. How are
Hello.
you?
I am doing well, Miss J.
It's
Thank
been
you
a
for
minute. I had to let the people know I had to dig Nadia out the crates. When I saw this topic, I said, Nadia, you have to be the one to talk about it. And let me tell you, I said to her, send me some speaking points, honey. Did she ever send me some things? It just goes to show how passionate you are about the things that you do. So, Nadia, outside of our bio, what are some of the things you want people to know before we jump into some of the juicy talk?
Yes. I guess for me, honestly, like you said, I approach so much of what I do with a great deal of passion and excitement. I think maybe the biggest thing to know is that I am a person who is deeply empathetic, kind to a fault, maybe, and hopelessly optimistic. And so my work in social enterprise is all about bringing us towards the middle. So if we're starting out on the for-profit side, how can we increase more social outreach in the work that we are doing while we look to maximize profit? And if we are on the nonprofit side, how can we become more efficient so that we're better using our resources to support our community? And that brings us a little bit more to the business side. And so, we take a look at the economy as a spectrum between the nonprofit on one side and for-profit on the next side. And it's all about bringing us all to the middle because our communities that we share, those who patronize our businesses or those who are served by our nonprofits, it's all the same people. These are our loved ones. These are our friends and family members. These are the people from down the street, right? And so when we come together to serve our collective community, everyone is able to do much better. So that's a bit more on the work that I do. Yeah, thank you again, Miss J, for having me. Good evening.
No worries. You know what? When you find quality, what we do. Shout out to Empress Thing for logging on and listening to this amazing conversation. We say good evening to you back. It works. All you have to do is just send a couple of comments. If you have questions, please feel free to send them anytime throughout the show. Now, let's talk about some key statistics on women in the workplace, right? So, I mean, we're going to cover things like leadership, the gender and pay gaps, and occupation segregation, how impact COVID-19 had a little bit of that, and even work-life balance, right? Like, we as women, there's so much to discuss when it comes to these pieces. And at the end of the day, we realize that those can be challenging, yet if we, really change our perspective on the way we look at it, then we have the opportunity. And I think we can both speak from our own experiences. Both of us have children in relationships, long-term relationships. So there's some things that we're going to touch on today. One of the facts that I want to share is around leadership roles. They're saying right now around 30% of women hold about senior management roles globally. Now, that's a huge increase from where it was maybe even a decade ago, right? And that's a significant variation across countries and industries, because we know from a macro level, there is, a very large amount of companies out there. So 30%, too bad, right? In the Fortune 500, there is about 8% of women that currently hold CEO positions. Now, I know that you are of global, like you've been around the globe, you've been doing your thing. What do you think are some of those pieces that you that are factoring in to these rising changes in the data that we're collecting?
Yeah, so I mean, as a global community in international development, we have been working really hard towards gender equality, gender parity. And so, we first we had the Millennial Development Goals. So I'm not really sure how familiar people are with some of these terms. For the Millennial Development Goals, which came to an end in the year 2000, as a global community, we sat down and said, what are the things that are really important that we need to all focus on and work on? And gender equality was a major one of those issues. When we looked across the world at girls who were not being given opportunity to go to school and therefore could not access the higher level paying jobs. So we needed to make sure that we were addressing that from the ground level. We looked at things like female genitalia mutilation in certain cultures, how that increased maternal mortality, and how it increased women's reproductive health and disease challenges. So we had to take a look at a lot of social determinants of health around women and what level of work they can reasonably attain. How much education can they reasonably attain so that they can get into those CEO positions? So what we're seeing now is not something that just started. This is the result of many decades of work in the international development community. And so after the MDGs in the year 2000, then we developed the SDGs, which are the Sustainable Development Goals. And so for the first time as a global economy of experts, we actually asked the countries and we asked the people, what is it that you think is important for us to work on? And although I had just a smidging of involvement there, I'm glad to know that I had any kind of involvement. And at that time in the Caribbean, we focused on making sure that underrepresented voices were at the table. And so we had consultations in, I think, 2 or 3 Caribbean territories, and we flew people in from other territories to make sure they were there, making sure that women's voices were heard, the elderly, youth, LGBTQ, 2SAI plus community members, and, making sure that all the voices that are traditionally left out of these conversations were there. And so making sure that women were able to say, this is why I can't work, or, this has been hindering me. All of that was then rolled into the SDGs. And so the SDGs were meant to come to an end in 2015. We kind of went back to it and said, nope, we're not ready yet. We're not done. Let's go again. And so 2030, we are, working towards really being able to build this out, right? I'm sorry, the MDGs came to an end in 2015, and 2015 we started the SDGs, which would come to an end in 2030. And so what we see now with women being able to attain those higher levels started many, many, many years ago. In the Caribbean, it was the ratification of Education for All in 1991. We then also, as a global community, in 1995, we ratified the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. That would again increase the parity of men and women, in particular, all genders included in the conversation, but particularly bringing up women and girls to the level of men and boys. And so it's been a long time of really hard work, and we are not there yet. It's better, but it's still not where we want to be.
Now, you say that in terms of we are not there yet, but the stats are starting to show that there's a reflection of people in there. What is it that you're looking to see, or maybe in the tables that you represent or sit at? What is the goal, the overall goal?
If we're talking metrics, the overall goal is 50%. But what we're concerned about isn't simply how many men versus how many women. It's also the level of representation within those groups of women. So, for example, when we take a look now at that 30% of high level positions being held by women and that 8% being held in CEO positions being held by women, we want to know what kind of social economic background do these women come from? What is the racial breakdown of these women? What are the different languages and cultures that are being represented by these women? And so we want to make sure that any woman from anywhere can attain these higher levels. And so if we do start looking around and we say, okay, well, yay, we have women, but then they're predominantly white women or predominantly Indian women or predominantly Black women. Now we're looking at, well, who isn't here? Who needs to be here? And that's where conversations on equity come in versus equality. So equality would be 50, right? But equity is asking more about who should be here. What perspectives are we missing at these decision-making tables? And so when we say we're not there yet, we're not just looking at making sure there are women. We want to have as much diversity in those voices present at the table as well.
Great. I think that's an amazing answer. And, you said something here that is going to trigger a little bit of localizing the conversation because, as we sit here and we're talking about the senior management, we're talking about company CEOs, not-for-profit executive directors, leaders of social enterprise and grassroots concepts. Let's break it down a little bit in terms of where does the discrepancy start right? I mean, if we look back from a local perspective, it starts really when you start your education, and we know in most countries, or some I can't really pinpoint specific, but we know in many countries education, just the first part of it is a struggle, right? It's getting that education. What would you say would be the starting point of where awareness needs to happen?
So before we get into formal education, there is the culture that surrounds us in our formative education. So our first 5 years of life, we are, being informally educated by those around us. And so, the things that we are taught culturally based on who is around us and what some of those pervasive opinions are about what you should or shouldn't be doing. So let's talk about something that we innocently ask children. I vehemently disagree with this question, but it's a natural question to ask. What do you want to be when you grow up? Right? And whether or not we notice it, we actually have really natural inflections to a child's response. So if a little girl says, I want to be a doctor, many years ago, it would have been, you can't do that. That's a man's work. Right? Now we'll go, oh, that's amazing, right? And we'll praise her for that level of thinking. If she were to say, I just want to have babies, we go, oh, well, that's sad, right? And so we then start telling her that if she wanted to choose a life of a homemaker, that she's now living below her potential, but that still should be her choice when she's older, right? And so we start to communicate very early to children that there's some things that are acceptable and some things that are not acceptable. And so when we talk about education, we are first talking about community level peer-to-peer education that can then be more, I would say, emphasized in institutionalized education. So, but before you get to, in Canada, it's JK, in the US, it's pre-K, in other places, it's reception. Before you get into your first year of primary school, you're already coming with all of this perspective on what you can and can't do.
Yeah.
Right? Are you allowed to do it because of, being male or female? Are you allowed to do it because of your background, right? I mean, we have to consider the role that religion plays
Mm-hmm.
in some of these conversations. So, especially when you have societies where culture and religion are really connected and intertwined, sometimes unraveling cultural norms can be an affront to that religion. And so you are really being very sensitive. And that's why that peer to peer conversation is much more important. If I come into your community as an outsider saying, I'm going to educate your children because you guys are telling them things that aren't true and aren't real. No, I don't know the way how to begin that conversation to explain why your grandmother says this and your mom says this, but now we're saying this and this is new,
Right.
right? And so having that cultural awareness is really critically important. And then you're able to really sync what you're talking about in school. There's also the reverse that we've seen be particularly useful when it comes to creating multi-generational change of attitudes. Let's take, for example, the 3 R's that many of us learned in school: reduce, reuse, recycle, right? Um, and we actually got more participation from adults because we told the children, you have to do it. You
Mm-hmm.
have to
Yeah.
separate your, and they come home and, mommy, my teacher says I need a blue bin for recycles and we need a compost bin. And then the kids nag their parents and they, oh my gosh, we need to,
Yeah.
just go get the blue bin for the kids. And so depending on the topic and the need for that change in conversation, we've taken both approaches in the development world. The things that tend to be more hands-on, easier to package, easier to understand, we tend to target children first. But things that are talking about changing attitudes and changing behaviors, those are conversations that we need to have with the adults so that we can, start to engender different feelings about what we're going to be doing next, with our children. I think one of the big ones in the Caribbean is learn through play. Learn
Mm-hmm.
through play is a hugely, profoundly different approach to education in the Caribbean. So when I worked with my counterparts in UNICEF, a lot of the conversations we had on learn through play actually started with the educators. Um, the educators are parents themselves. They also have children who are
Yeah.
in school.
Yeah.
And so they needed a framework that would allow them to complete their curricula while also including more play-based approaches to learning. But when you are in an education system that is so heavily colonized, where there's a strong authority figure in the classroom and you sit and you focus and, all of these things that we praise as discipline are highly counterproductive to the way how an infant learns. And so, all the conversation on learn through play, it's still ongoing. It's still a bit of a tussle in the
Mm.
Caribbean because it's just not the
Yeah.
way how we teach. So different
Mm-hmm.
pockets of society are where we would start the conversation depending on the outcome that we need to drive.
And I mean, at the end of the day, you said something key there. It's the belief systems, right? And when you go, you having the ability to travel the world and study in different environments, that open you to learning there's more than just what my parents or great grandparents or great grandparents, right? And there's something that we talk about in terms of, you just said the first 5 years is the most impactful for children to learn. And so while we have the culture of education in every country, there's also the lack of awareness, because again, you're passing down, you're learning from a legacy of people who have grew up in a specific environment. And then there are those who are reaching out and thinking outside of the box a bit to say, you know what, there is room for not better, I would say, but alternative learning, right? Because they all have their pros and cons, right? I mean, if we leave our kids to play unstructured all the time, they wouldn't be structured. If we left them to be structured all the time, they wouldn't know how to be unstructured. So there comes a balance with that. In that balance, one of the things that, you can, this is something that, people of every exposure is a key word, exploration is a key word. When we teach people how to educate and explore, then they have, or sorry, when we educate them to explore, we help them to see that there is something beyond what their families may know or have experienced. Holding true to what they're doing, holding true to those beliefs in terms of respecting, because it's the experience that that their parents had, right? But on the same note, it's also exposing them. And we look now at the occupational segregation that's happening across these industries, where we have a high overrepresentation of women in education and healthcare, but a very low representation in technology and engineering, right? And so these are some of the things that you can see that if we just change, or just, to your word, smidge, just a smidge to the left, and show some of those pieces, that we can actually start opening the mind of a young child to embrace that there's options, right?
Absolutely.
And that your brain may function under the science and tech. And, because it's funny, I remember us doing programs in the community, and we would offer science and this and that. And it would be so interesting to see the young girls versus young boys, and see how when they think alike, and the guys would be like, "Oh, like, how do you know that?" And it's almost like, because they were girls, they shouldn't know that.
Right. Yeah.
Right? So I mean, even
then you're surprised, right? You're like, you're so smart for a girl,
Well, and comes the saying, you throw like a girl, right? Or you stop crying like a girl. Like, these are some of the things that are said in our homes that we don't even realize are very gender biased. And
absolutely,
we're creating that mountain or barrier for them. Let's talk a little bit about how impact of COVID-19 impacts some of that conversation, in terms of the disproportionate. Today, the language is all Greek to me. So if it just pretend you understand what I'm saying, I'm learning a new language. It affects women in the workplace. And, they're saying that they're being reduced in hours, especially in the service industries, that they're reporting a lot of job losses. What do you think some of the other impacts that, may not be out there widely, was an impact of women in the workplace?
Yeah. So COVID-19, we'll leave all conspiracy conversations and, to the side. But
that's the part 2 of the show, number.
But what the global pandemic actually, it helped to reveal a lot of broken systems that many of us already knew were there. So it really just amplified it to make it more obvious for the rest of the world. And one of those things would be the way how women and work interact. So first of all, let's talk about the feminization of industries. So that's talking about when you have an increase in the representation of women, and even past the point of 50% of women in an industry. And then you also begin to realize one of two things happen. Either the rest of the industry is progressing, but the highly feminized portion of that industry is kind of left behind, or there are active policy changes in the feminized area of that industry that actually work against the woman. Right. And so, for example, we talk about hours, right? And how those conversations that we have at the kitchen table impact wider industry. So you mentioned more women in education, right? Now, if we look at where women are represented in education, it's in the early years.
Yeah.
Further, so in every level of school, early years, primary, secondary, tertiary, at every level, women have more administrative roles. And the higher you go up in authority, the more masculinized that segment of the industry becomes. And that's all the way across. And so you will find if you have men working in early childhood, primary to middle school, they tend to be principals, vice principals, superintendents. They're at the higher levels. They basically come in at entry and they get past that as quickly as possible out of classroom and into areas of authority. Women tend to stay longer in classroom. They tend to be in more support roles. And then, of course, there's the cultural response to seeing a man in your toddler's classroom, right? I'm a huge advocate for increasing examples of masculinity in early childhood classrooms. But a lot of parents feel extremely uncomfortable at the idea of a man changing their child's diaper, right? And so that's one of the things where we don't have any kind of alignment between culture and the direction that we want to drive that industry. So we talk about representation racially, and we ask in Canada, for example, we would ask a Black person, how old were you when you had your first Black teacher? Now ask a boy, how old were you when you had your first male teacher, right? You'll find then that not only are the men in those higher places of authority, but they also tend to be the phys ed teachers, the PE teachers more often than not, right? And so that's why I said when I talk about we're not there yet, I don't just want to know that a school has 50% male, 50% female staffing. I want to know the distribution of genders throughout staff roles, right? So I want a more even distribution in early childhood. I want a more even distribution in administration, a more even distribution in leadership, for example. So education was one that you mentioned. The care economy, right? And we can go with nurture versus nature. We can talk about the biological differences in the male-female brain. We can talk about left brain, right brain. We can talk about all of those things. But what we're seeing and looking to address is the fact that mostly women participate in the care economy. So, you are a nurse. Canada has something called a peer support worker. You're a social worker. You're doing that work that calls for heavy emotional investment in the individuals who are receiving service from you. And COVID-19 showed us, one, we can't live without these people, right? And it highlighted, for example, we weren't necessarily having conversations on how the public needs to treat nurses. Right? We weren't having any strong rules around, what level of abuse is okay. I understand you're having a bad day because you have a headache or because you just busted your toe open and that's why you're in the ER. At what point do we stop telling a woman it's your job to accept verbal abuse from a service recipient? Right. And because it's a lot easier for many cultures for us to be disrespectful to a woman, and that's what you get paid to do, and my taxes pay you, and all these, these words that are weaponized against women are much easier to use in those situations because you're supposed to care. You're supposed to be loving. You're supposed to be forgiving. It's supposed to be okay if my child bites you. It's supposed to be okay, if I throw the medication tray away when you're coming. It's supposed to be okay, right? Because that's just, you're a woman, you're a nurturer, right? This isn't a big deal for you. The other thing that we also realize is we have women in what we call the sandwich generation. You're taking care of children, you're taking care of elderly family members as well. 100%. So you are put in a position where your work at home is not considered valuable work to your community, right? It's not, it cannot be monetized. You can't put a dollar amount to the number of times you change a diaper, the number of times you wipe a butt, the number of times you cook chicken nuggets today, or the number of times that you're pureeing a meal for your elderly great grandmother, right? Yeah. You can't monetize this. And so your expectations at home are increasing while your expectations at work are increasing. And then when you say that you're burnt out, you hear things like, oh, it must just be her period. Right. And so the language that is used in highly feminized industries, we see that, we just don't have policies to match because our policymakers tend to be men.
Mm-hmm.
And so while we're looking to drive change, it's this bit of a seesaw. We improve here, but we're falling down here, and then we bring it up and we fall down here, and we keep the seesaw going until we find somewhere that's closer to equilibrium. So these highly feminized industries not just experience the shift from more men to more women in the industry, but they also experience a shift in the perspective on that job, right? Whether or not that job is now seen as, a good job or not so much a good job anymore. And we're also seeing either policy being left behind or policy changing around the industry, but excluding that highly feminized area of work. And so these are things that COVID-19 revealed for us, well, the pandemic revealed to us, again, on a global scale. In Canada, for example, it always reminds people that educators were striking when everything got shut down, right?
Mm-hmm.
The problems that we face in education did not begin in COVID. We had a threatened nurse strike before COVID, right? There, a lot of the things that we were not able to ignore in COVID were true before. And now we have more impetus to actually address some of these things. We look at the George Floyd murder, for example. Black people across North America and Europe, the global North, it's not now that Black people are facing discrimination. It just became the point at which, people were done with it, right? And we're done with the idea of slow change. In 1920, when women took to the streets, they were done with slow change. We want women's suffrage now, right? Again, back to that conversation on equality versus equity. Women's suffrage in 1920 was about equality. Women should have the right to vote, but it wasn't equitable because what few Black women were involved in the march, they were at the back, right? And so so that's as we take these conversations on women at work and what we are seeing in the trends versus what we experienced before and the changes that we as a development community understand that we need to make, we are having wider conversation now than we've ever had as a development community before.
100%. I agree with a lot of what you're saying, but I do want to throw a little bit of a DA, a devil's advocate into the picture because we talk about work-life balance. We want equity, all right. We want equality, and we speak of these things. But what are some of the? What's your? I guess your perspective on this? What are some of the realities that women need to understand before they get to marching and holding up these signs? What do you think are some of those realities?
The world isn't ready. That's the plain truth. The world isn't ready, right? As a social development practitioner, we use the term practitioner because we are constantly testing and trying and, monitoring and evaluating and tweaking and going back at it. And the work that we do is measured in decades. So unfortunately, we can't really tell how long it's going to take. And so that's why we have all of these checkpoints 10, 15, 20 years down the road. The truth is, while there are the leaders of the world, the forward thinkers of the world who are saying, this is what the data shows, these are the interventions, the general public is not interested, right?
Well, I think just jumping in there, the catalyst though of saying that is that what happens to the family structure, right? What happens, how do we, or maybe helping people to see how this plays out? Because as we know, there's a push for women to climb the corporate ladder or to hold positions of power, or whatever the case may be. I think there's a lot of women who struggle with that, especially if they have young ones at home, right? It's a little bit easier when your kids are grown up and they're off into their own worlds, and you have the ability to kind of focus. Because to get at that level of promotion, I've been through several promotions throughout my career, but I also had to sacrifice. And if I didn't have a counterpart or a significant other who was able to step in and take care of those times where I couldn't be the mom, right? Where I couldn't be at every little basketball game or here or there, whatever the case is. So how do we help women to not just get that work life balance, but understand that your role in your child's life is just as important as being the CEO of a Fortune 500 company?
Yes. I mean, maybe we should have started with that question at the beginning because
Girl,
that
you know I like to
could
turn it up a little bit. You know, to turn it up a little bit.
that could take the hour. That could take the hour. First of all,
Well, you have roughly. No, I'm just joking. I'm just joking. Go
first
ahead.
thing, my dad always said, you can do anything you want, but you can't do everything, you know? And
Mm,
as we have in the comment here, there's more, need for more support for working moms.
mm,
So we need to kind of, again, if we look back at that conversation around what we should be doing in school versus what children are hearing at home, right?
yeah,
So, if you are dad and dad comes home from work. I think about Caribbean context, right? Like the really old way of thinking about it. Mom is home with the kids by the time they get home from school. Mom has been home for most of the day. She's, sewing their school uniforms and, cleaning and doing all the
my
at
mom
home.
never sewed me no school uniform. Shoot, I didn't even
Don't
have a
worry, my
school
mom didn't
uniform.
either, but I'm talking about the really traditional, like back in the day Caribbean mom,
You
yeah.
digging deep in the crates, yeah.
She's making everything from scratch at home. And then when daddy comes home, you shush the children because he's a hardworking man and he is tired, and he's allowed to be tired because he works out there. She's not allowed to be tired because she was at home. And so the work she did at home doesn't count as work, right? Because home is where
Right.
you go to rest. And so, he comes home, you shush the kids, he comes, he pats the kids on their head, maybe throws them up in the air every once in a while. And then she sits him down, serves his food first. Then the children eat, and she caters to him for the rest of the evening. Children are put off to bed, and then, and so your entire life is phased around this idea of husband, father has come home.
Mm,
We grow up in these homes that have a clear hierarchy in terms of the structure of the home, but all the kids know it's whatever mom says that goes, right?
super
So
fast.
we have this dual matriarchal home, patriarchal society. Outside of the house, men are in charge. Inside of the house, mom is in charge. We come through many, many years now of reduction in marriage rates, the increase of the visiting father, the
Or the
increase of
absentee one.
the absentee father, right? Single parent homes, and we know the majority of single parent homes are single moms. And so this is where we start. This is her reality. Now she has to go get a job. And the person who's going to hire her at this job reflects the man who is or isn't at home, right? And so now she has both places where there's an immediate ceiling to, her activity. So now let's come forward, right? Now we've been told we are strong. We've told ourselves that we can do it all. We've told ourselves that we're superwoman, and I can clean, and I can cook, and I can show up for the basketball game, and I can, climb the ladder at work, and I can, dress all sexy and always be ready for my husband, and I can do all the things. I'm never going to let my body go like those other women. And we come into this perspective on, you know what, I don't have to give up any parts of it. And then our bodies start telling us, actually, you do.
Well, you know what they give up? They do give up something. They
You
give
have
up
to.
self-care, but they give up the wrong thing.
Self-care, right?
They give
Yeah,
up the
this is
wrong
true.
thing, right?
This
Because
is
we
the
talk
first thing
about
that goes.
having two full-time jobs, one actually being employed and one and others. Now, if you're in a position where you don't have an option, right, you got to go out and work. You know what I'm saying? For whatever the
Exactly.
situation may be. The one thing, ladies, I'm going to say to you is stop giving up you. because at the end of the day, if you are not functional, nothing is functional. Being a mom, a wife, a CEO, a mailroom monitor, supervisor, whatever the case is,
Yep.
that's what women have given up. They have given up
Exactly.
their health, their self care, their self worth, their esteem, to prove that I could do bad all by myself. Right?
Exactly, exactly. And when we look at the healthcare rates and we look at the reduction of women's ability to actually perform their jobs because they are holding these multiple roles and taking on
Mhm.
all of this emotional investment in multiple relationships. So for example, in Ontario, Canada, we recently tabled Working for Workers, the Sixth Act, which is the first time that we considered, that you if the government is giving 27 weeks of benefits,
Maternity.
financial
Mhm.
benefits, but your job is only protected for 3 days, what's the point? Right? If your
Yeah.
employer can decide on day 5, well, stay and keep getting your government money, but you don't have a job to come back to, they have every right to do that up until now. Right? We talk about women who have to leave home to go to work, and you go to work in a male dominated culture, and you're not even able to buy your personal protective equipment that fits your body because this is a man's work. And
Yeah.
so the feminization of the trades industry, we're learning a bit better now that we need to bring policy along while we also encourage
Exactly.
more women to enter the trades at the
Yeah.
same time, right? Instead of waiting. So, I mean, only last year did we have to start cleaning the bathroom. Literally. 2023 was the first time that it was a requirement to not just clean, but document that you're cleaning the bathrooms, because these were industries that were male dominated. And now you have the presence of women. And so now you have to change behavior. And so you asked earlier, what are the realities? Well, the realities are that the people who benefit from the status quo don't want these changes. So if you're
Right.
going into a male dominated industry, well, now how am I supposed to do this? And how am I supposed to do that? And all these women are getting in the way. And, at least 1 week a month, she's too tired. And so the cultural response to the shift is where we get the most work. We talk about, you mentioned equality and equity, which are words that we hear a lot in development, becoming a lot more popular now. People hear DEI, so diversity, equity, inclusion. Sometimes you hear accessibility, and not everybody remembers that accessibility is a very crucial point, a very crucial indicator that we need to focus on. But while we're talking about all of this, you hire, let's say you need more Black people, right? You hire someone like me because I check a lot of boxes for you. You're Black, migrant, female, young, right? And then you put that person in a position of power, but it's subverted power, right? Because all of the predated structures haven't changed. And so as long as you're willing to smile and toe the line, you're fine. But the minute you actually try to make some changes, now you're a problem. Now you no longer fit, right? Your tone is being policed, right? The way how you say everything that you do and say then is under a different level of scrutiny. And so
Mhm.
the society isn't always ready for the change. Do
Mhm.
you stop? No, you don't stop. The only way that we make the change is to push it forward, right?
Mhm. Or
Um,
more so, learn to play the game. Right? A lot of times I've
yes
watched from
and
my
no.
experience, and I'm going to give you my perspective.
Yeah,
You can,
yeah.
disagreeing is always great because I love a debate. But one of the things I've learned in my experience working in corporate is that people come in and they don't understand change management. They
Mhm.
come in and it becomes this finger pointing thing, and they say you attract a lot more flies to honey than vinegar. And so understanding how change impacts, because this is still a perspective, that this is something that somebody has grown up believing, right? That men are in the workplace, women are home in the kitchen popping the babies, and popping bottles. So I think there's a something to be said around understanding the skill sets that are needed to impact change, right? And you could see that through history. You could see the walk that they did for Martin Luther King walks, or you could see the how way Malcolm X, or even Hidden Figures, the movie, how they showed women in NASA, being intricate to the whole space, space, bringing man to space or landing the rockets and the ships and whatever else was there. But I think there's a something that underlying that a lot of women don't recognize is that being being emotional is who we are. That's how we are innately designed, and that's what makes us great nurturers, and that's what makes us instinctual and what gets us along with people. But I think a other part of that is also understanding how to navigate what and read the room. To be honest, read the room to know that you're looking at a policy that is decades old. You're looking at people who came into these positions from they were in the mailroom and are now running massive departments or at that level. And I think sometimes people and change happens because it's a need, but there's also a skill set behind it, right? And I think a lot of times that I've witnessed is that women in power tend to sometimes abuse it. The same people that were trying to get them there are the same people who are putting their knee.
And that's the other side to playing the game, right?
Yeah.
You can't forget that it's a game. I think that's the issue, right? There's definitely a point where you have to recognize this is how it works, right? So, for example, you're not going to get into your car and decide this gas car should be electric today.
Yeah. Good luck.
Right?
If you can, I'll let you, girl. I'm trying out, no, seriously.
Right. Yeah. So you're not going to decide, okay, I am not going to the gas station. I'm going to go buy a solar panel and just plop it on the top of the car. And suddenly I'm going to have an electric vehicle. Well, no, that's not really how it works. Yeah. Changing that from one type of vehicle to another type of vehicle first requires you to understand how this vehicle works, right? 100%. So when we talk about playing the game, you have to have an understanding of where you are and what is what, right? What are the expectations, fair or unfair? What are the requirements, right or wrong? You have to at least have a clear picture and a good lay of the land. The other side to that, the flip coin to that, is understanding where and how to draw your boundaries. Right. So when you are playing the game to the point where you've now forgotten what it took for you to get where you are, and you have now become the perpetrator of oppression, now we have a problem. So you cannot forget, one, it's a game, two, your role in that game. Right. Yes. So I always tell people, think about, if you go back with me now to Neo in the Matrix, right? Neo had to go into the computer. Right. Yes. He had to become a part of it, but he had to destroy it from within. Yes. And the other part, that if you are really a change maker, if you are a true advocate for change, the other thing that we don't always recognize is the level of self-sacrifice that comes with that. Right. So if you are going to be representing the best interests of others, sometimes it does require a personal sacrifice of your own career goals, your own push forward, because if you are speaking truth to power, power is not interested in what you have to say. Power will do everything to maintain power. And so if you are coming into an industry or a place of work and you are an other, right? So you're a woman, or you are a woman who comes from, a poor community, right? A lower socioeconomic background. Or you are a migrant woman, you speak with an accent, or, you speak English differently. Or you are, you are a trans woman, they're all the different layers of what bring you to the table as an other, right? And so if you are there and you are easily othered, then you need to understand, one, where the boundaries lie, right? So one, how does it work? Two, where the boundaries lie. Three, how much give do you have on those boundaries? Like where your heart stops, right? And at what point do you stop representing yourself and start representing the others who would be following you, right? Yes. And so when we understand that, yes, absolutely, corporate, massive game, right? When you understand
anything, I think it's
anything. I work in nonprofit, huge game.
It's
right?
and exactly. Just a quick pause before we had to. I mean, wow, we're almost already at the end of the show, and I didn't even get to welcome all the new listeners coming in. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're here with Jay Nadia Headley, Strategic Director of 2114 Consultancy, and we are having a serious conversation about women in the workplace. Now, there is so much we haven't even yet to cover. This is going to be a part two because it has to happen. We haven't talked about gender pay gaps. We haven't talked about more deeper. We're now kind of focusing on the leadership role. So welcome to the Lovely Afrobeat Music Talk Radio here on Community Consultations with your host, Ms. Jai. What we do each and every week is ensure that we're talking about things that are having impact locally and globally. So let's just get back into it because we're almost on a 10-minute wrap up here, but there is so much gems coming from Nadia today. I would love for all of you to continue logging in and listening to this conversation. So Nadia, let's just jump back into what we were talking about in terms of, you said that, we kind of rolling down, things, the focus is, and I want to touch a little bit on the third point there about understanding, like you said, they get into the position and, they're talking about their boundaries and what they can and will not accept, et cetera, and I think one of the biggest thing that leads to that is understanding that regardless of whether you're there or you're not, every person in the company plays a role to the culture. And so a lot of the times, we try to start the change from top, but in some cases, it has to be a bottom up approach versus a top down approach, right? Because for the most part, it is the bottom that kind of sets the tone in a way, right? It's those people that are making those remarks and whatever the case may be. And that other box that they've checked is sometimes based on perception, not necessarily their reality, right? I mean, I've been in positions where I've been highly respected for what I do, but I also had to fight a lot of the stereotypes and biases that were set not by me, but sometimes my own fellow Black women, who went in there and, for all sake of the word, created a S show, and it's like, now you have to go there and show them that that's not who we are, that's not what we represent, and we actually have the skill sets to do the job. How would you kind of table that in terms of the boundaries and getting them to understand before they can impact change?
Yeah. That's a lot, right? And I kind of want, I
I
want a
can
lot
help you, girl. You know what? I'm
of,
Jay, honey. I bring the magic. No, I'm just- I bring the heavy things. That's what I'm saying. Look at my JDA, honey. Before it's not deep, let me talk to you about this business.
absolutely, Miss J is going to bring it.
You know I'm bringing the noise. You know what I'm saying? They don't call me Thunder for nothing. They don't call me Thunder. Don't. I just made that up.
We just made it up, but we're going to roll with it. We'll roll with it.
You got the reference.
Yeah. But I think it goes back to one of the things that you mentioned earlier, right? In terms of that self-care.
Mm-hmm.
When we are developing different models and looking at what the possibilities are, and we're in that childlike state, and the world would be wonderful if, and what if we could, and that kind of thing. But when we are in the day-to-day reality of it, it is heavy and it is hard and it is work that does not ease up. And if you are the person who is spearheading change, whether or not you signed up for it, right? Because that's the other part. Some people, like in nonprofit, that's all we're about, right? We see a problem, we want to fix a problem, we're going after the solution. But if you are in the corporate world, and blue collar, white collar job, and you are just living life, right, and going to work, but then you come up against something that isn't just unfair today, based on circumstance, but is structurally and systemically unfair, in that whether it's happening to you or anyone else like you, it's going to be similarly unfair. When you come up a situation like that, you have to know you, right? You have to know what level of care you need for yourself going into this environment, right? And so are you going to be the one who closes your eyes while the other person is being treated unfairly? Are you going to be the one who's just going to grin and bear it so that you can get that dollar to go home and make those chicken nuggets for your kids? Are you going to be the one who cannot stand in the face of injustice. And so you have to say something, you have to make a change. And are you willing to do that to the point of self-sacrifice? Are you at the point in your career? I mean, I've been at the point in my career where I was like, I am not dealing with this anymore. Nope, bye. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
You may be at a point in your life and in your career. We fly, right?
Fly, honey. Let's go.
Where you recognize that your health, physical, mental, spiritual, emotional health is way more important than, any of these other metrics that are used to determine success in life. And so you have to know where you are at that point in your life. What are your needs, right? There are many of us who have just put our heads down and just dealt with it, right? Because we needed to deal with the basic requirements of food, shelter, clothing, right? And then at different points in our lives, we've been able to make bigger, more vast decisions because we've got the basic parts covered and we are about growth and that growth trajectory. So are you able to withstand the brunt that comes against you as the change maker? And again, you may not have signed up for this. You might be working on a factory line, right? And you just realize that there is one particular supervisor who's always coming down hard on another female worker, right? You may realize that she's receiving passes that make her uncomfortable. You may notice these things, right? Do you then speak up? Are you the woman who needs to say something? Are you going to just go to her? Is that your method to be helpful, to tell her that, you see and she can come confide in you? Are you going to, go and tell him, what you're doing is not fair? Do you go to HR? Do you pick up your picket, and hit the front door and start a strike? You have to know you have to know what your limits are. You have to know the point at which you can no longer stand for injustice. And again, while you're playing the game of I need to eat and I need to also start enjoying my life and enjoying my work, right? Then you'll need to know how you can transition from one place to the next. At the end of the day, education is always your friend. And I'm not just talking about institutionalized or traditional education, right? How many different perspectives can you bring on any given conversation? So again, let's take the example, you're a line worker in a factory and you notice that someone is being treated unfairly. Do you know what your rights are? Are you reading your manual at work? Are you aware of, what the chain of command actually is? Do you know where to go to report a problem? Do you know where to go to report outside of your employer? Do you know the hotline number for the Human Commission for the Commission for Human Rights? How far do you need to go to have your message heard? Do you know what to do? Right. And if you're not in a position to gain that knowledge, who else can you put around you? If we are going to be change makers in our spaces, then, it's about educating ourselves about who we are. It's about educating ourselves about where we are, educating ourselves about where we need to go, and educating ourselves about how to get there. And
I'm going to add one more to that. It's also educating yourself to know your job.
Exactly. Right? Where we are. Yeah.
You're fulfilling a role. And so sometimes, I think part of that is reminding yourself that your first and foremost commitment is to the mission, philosophy, and goals of that company, regardless of what your thought process may be in terms of the culture within it. And that is something where I think there needs to be a balance in terms of saying that I am here to make change, but also to remember that you don't have to fall on the stake for everything that's happening, right? Because again, at the end of the day, half of those people you're trying to protect, I know from experience, are not feeding my children, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And when as soon as corporate says something to them, their mouths closed, and you're sitting there with your one stick and sign.
Right.
Oh, everybody go.
Exactly.
So I think a part of that message is understanding that things are changing, and it may take a long time. We're looking at a gender pay gap that used to be at 50 cents on the dollar. Now it's up to 82 cents for every dollar. So things are making way. But I think for women, we also have to be careful to not put this onus that now you're in senior management or now you're in a position of power that it's on you to make sure there's equity. I think there's something to be said that happens at every level. right? It's the way you carry yourself. It's the way you show them that you show everybody, demonstrate that you are a valuable asset to the company versus the emotion of it's not fair. I
Yeah.
am a true believer that every person or every woman needs those supports in order to functionalize her job, whether on and in or out of the workplace, right? In terms of that. But I think sometimes we still have to remind women that your job is first and foremost, because that's what's going to get your lifestyle. That's going to take care of your kids. That's going to take you to the next step of your life. So that representation, has to be something. If you choose to, do it with grace.
If you choose to,
If
yes.
you
Yeah.
choose to,
Yeah.
do it with grace. And if you don't, leave behind a pathway where other women can take that leverage from you, right? That can say, you know what, she did such a good job. Another woman in the workplace, despite color, background, belief systems, whatever the case is, just always remember that if you're trailblazing in a pathway of advancement, remember that you are an example, you're a role model, to many, and I think that regardless of whether you're taking on the fight of social or employment injustice, or you're taking on something else, it's there. All right, we have to start on this wrap up, honey. This ascension is like there's so much. There is so much. And I love the fact that we can have varying opinions on things because, again, experiences breed different results, but one of the things
Absolutely.
that we see. So what is that wrap up that you want to leave with the women who
Yeah.
are in the game?
Yes.
What you want to say?
I think it's that foundational piece on first educating ourselves about who we are,
Mhm.
right? And having a really sober understanding of, what is life for me right now, and what do I need to be getting out of this moment. As Miss J mentioned, sometimes it's quick, most of the time it's not. And so if I am going to be any part of this process, I have to be healthy, right? I have to be taking and giving at the same time, not just giving, or taking entirely. And so, really educating ourselves about who we are in this moment. What does it mean for me to be and give your job title? What does it mean for me to be a mother? What does it mean for me to be a wife? What does it mean to me to be a partner? And what is it that I need to be able to plant within myself to be able to produce the right fruit that will help me in this moment. As
Mhm.
Miss J said, sometimes you're the one leading the charge, sometimes you're not. And you need to just be able to understand, why am I not leading on this issue right now, right?
Yes.
In nonprofit work, for example, it's really important for people to be able to say, this is the problem I am going to try to work towards a solution for.
Mhm,
You
mhm.
cannot change all of it, right? You
Yep.
can't affect all of it,
Nope.
right? And so I work in education, I focus on children. I cannot save the whales, right?
Mm.
Someone else is going to do that part.
Someone
And I
got to get the seals, honey. Someone
somebody's
else
got
got
to
to
get
get
the
these
skills,
seals.
right? But it is not me, not today, right?
Oh, yeah,
And
today. I
so
got to go home and make chicken nuggets. You know what I'm saying?
exactly, exactly, right? And so the
Facts.
more we understand ourselves and we know what it is that is true for us, what that passion is that drives us, the more we are able and free to act. And so, more important than, are you a change maker? Are you not a change maker? Are you acting in your best interest? Right.
Yes.
And in order to know your best interest, you must know you. And so, for every woman across the globe, no matter how easy or hard life is at this moment, our call to solidarity and action is to get to know you, fall in love with you, take care of you,
1,000%.
and start answering the question about what you need, because that is the last question that we as women ask ourselves.
And it needs to be the first question we ask each and every day. Nadia Headley, I'd like to thank you for coming out now. I mean, you see Nadia today, you will be seeing her again. I'm happy to be welcoming her to the show. Next week, she's going to be on. We're going to be on with a guest, and we're going to be having more of these important conversations. And we want to thank you for showing up today. If you're hitting the replay, take the gems, run with it. Women, this one was for you. We are always looking to pride ourselves on having conversations that are tough, and that's why Community Conversations was created by Love Bay, was because they're willing to have these tough conversations. They're willing to provide a platform where these topics can be addressed. To all the guests who are here today, thank you for your comments. MN, this is an empowering show. Thank you. We strive to bring you the best of the best. We strive to bring you people who are not just experts in their field, but have lived experiences that they can share. Not every experience someone shares on the show has to be your experience, but you can learn from it. So, with all saying all of that, and before I get kicked off my own screen, I'd like to say thank you so much for being here. Thank you for keeping the conversation going. As always, tune in Sunday at 5 p.m. for Community Conversations right here on Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. And as you know, the third annual gift giving is coming up. If you are in the Brampton or Toronto or GTA and you want to donate some gifts, we have a lot of amazing children attending this event. Please hit up infolovebay@gmail.com, and you can do monetary or send any gift that you think a child between 1 to 16 years of age would appreciate. Let's make their holiday and end of year an amazing one. Thank you again, everyone. And I'm Miss J, your hostess with the mostest, and signing off right here on Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio of Community Consultations. We'll see you again. And always remember, keep talking.